in reaction to what is over 1,000 FBS players going into the portal, somewhere between 2 and 4,000 Division One players in the portal, depending on who you talk to, who's officially in, who's just planning to go in. It's easy to assume that this portal madness is wheels off already. So, Jake, let's start with you. The caliber of names that immediately went into the portal the day that this thing opened were shocking. And it's not just talented, former five-star guys that had a lot of accolades coming out of high school, or maybe guys that lost their job due to injury. These are starters. These are blue chippers through and through. They're just deciding, I might go test the greener grass theory over at a different school and pick up a bigger NIL check, or maybe just use it as leverage to see if they should go to the NFL draft. What do you make of all of these headline names just simply deciding, yeah, thanks, but no thanks. I might be going somewhere else.
Yeah, for the headline guys, guys like a Dylan Gabriel, for example, out of OU, those are guys that are going to find a home, and they'll find a home at a good program. And for your guys that are further down the roster, I'll get back to your point in a second. That's where I think you start to have a lot of the issues, but um, for these 4 and 5 star guys who had started at their original university and then have decided to transfer out, it's a decision that like you said, could be used as leverage to get into the NFL draft, leverage to get themselves a new NIL deal. Um, through their, or not through their current institution, but around the institution. Um, so I do think that there's a lot of benefits for those guys that are at the top of the list. Guys like Trevor Etienne, who I believe went in today,
Mhm.
if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So guys like him, he'll have no issue finding a spot, but it's those guys at the bottom of the roster that I'm just not quite understanding from their perspective, I guess, why they would want to potentially find themselves in a spot where they go to a place where they're not going to have that same playing time that they had at their original school.
I think of a guy like Spencer Sanders, right, from Oklahoma State, who very easily could have been the starting quarterback at Oklahoma State this season. Started a kind of a weird quarterback carousel there in Stillwater. Obviously, Oklahoma State got the last laugh. They go to the Big 12 championship and will play for a bowl game, while Spencer Sanders largely rode the bench. Came in some backup situations, some packages that Ole Miss had. But you're right. To your point, it's like there's nothing guaranteed. Even if you go to another program promising you playing time, like I'm sure Lane did to Spencer Sanders, it's not always going to be the reality. I don't know that that's ever going to be fixed, Trey. That just seems like a permanent risk anytime you go into the portal.
Yeah, and it's always going to feel like the grass is greener on the other side. And, there's another side that we haven't talked about yet. There's certainly coaches encouraging certain players to go into the portal, whether they feel like they can get someone better at that position out of the portal or out of the high school ranks. That we all know that those conversations happen on each and every campus. So, at a certain point, these guys have to protect themselves and protect their, business decisions as they're looking at not just their NFL possible futures, but 99% of these guys, their playing days are going to be over after college football, after their final game of their senior year, or whenever that does, however many years of eligibility we have, because I don't even know anymore with some of these guys that are entering the transfer portal. I have no idea how they still have eligibility remaining, but when that eligibility does expire, so many of these guys are not going to be collecting an NFL paycheck. So I do feel for them that if someone's offering you a better NIL deal, or you feel like you can, market yourself better while you can, I feel for them there, right? But yeah, so many, it just opens the door for so many bad actors in the business. I'm not like accusing anybody in particular of this, but I'm sure we can all think of coaches that may or may not be doing things completely above board when it comes to the transfer portal and promising things that they may not intend to keep.
Yeah. Well, and you're right. And Jake, listen, you're a student at Texas A&M. You're someone that has a lot of inside knowledge with the sources that you run into. We've talked a lot about Texas A&M over these last couple days. It felt like we were maybe prematurely celebrating guys not heading to the portal. We thought Elko was going to keep so many of these star players, and then you see guys like Walter Nolan, LT Overton go in, Fadil Diggs, etc. I don't necessarily want to break down that specific example because it's just our school, but I think it's a good example of schools that experienced a boom in recruiting and accumulated a lot of talent, right? A lot of high grade blue chip talent, the best recruiting class ever assembled, right, under Jimbo Fisher. And now close to, if not over half of those guys, I believe, have either hit the portal or are gone now. Tell me your thoughts on high school recruiting. What kind of emphasis is being put on high school recruiting now going forward versus simply just hitting the portal if you're going to spend a whole cycle, 2 years or more, recruiting these guys only to see them walk out the door 365 days or less after signing day because they're not getting the playing time they wanted?
Yeah, I think it's brutally important at this point for coaches to be honest with these guys, especially as they approach the end of their senior year, as we get closer to signing day. I think it's really important that they tell them how it's going to be, because this is the time of year where we start to get together, who's going where within the portal. And I think that, and that's one of the trickier parts too, is because the portal date does run so close to that early signing day. And now this is something that coaches have to balance too. So, I think high school recruiting and just being honest with the guys that you are trying to bring in is more important now than ever, because, you're not just recruiting these guys once. You're having to recruit them pretty much their entire career at that school. So, you gotta get that guy in first, but once they're in the door, the door is still open for them to get out with the one free transfer. And so, I think that that's going to be something that's going to be really interesting to see how this unfolds. Is how are high schoolers going to leverage the possibility of leaving after year one if they're not getting the playing time that they foresaw, especially a lot of the skill positions where a lot of these rosters have filled rooms, like with especially quarterbacks. I think that that's going to be something that we see a lot of, is a lot of these higher caliber recruits out of high school, at least, jumping ship because they didn't, land the job that they wanted, and they didn't see themselves progressing up the depth chart the way that they thought they would.
Do you think, and I'll open this up to both of you guys, it seems like some of these incredibly bold headlines coming out of high school, hey, this kid is the next X factor, this is the next big thing. It seems like nowadays in the world of NIL, they're set up to fail because, one, they either come in with these massive expectations, oftentimes attached to a dollar amount that is not necessarily private information. I mean, this stuff leaks out pretty frequently, and whether or not you can determine the exact dollar amount that a kid is getting or not, I mean, heck, the internet is a horrible place, right? And rumors are going to spread, but still, the best guys are going to get large NIL deals. We know this. This is the modern era of college football. But in that era, when so much is expected from them, from the boosters, from the fans, from, quite honestly, the internet in general, otherwise you become a meme, it seems like development is being stifled in a way that I don't think we've ever seen. I'd love for you guys to kind of weigh in on that. It feels like we're rushing these kids to the big leagues.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, you think like 50 years ago, we didn't even let freshmen play at the varsity level on the college football field. Now we expect them to be game breakers right out of high school. So it's just incredible to think about over these last few years. You've really seen the experienced teams rise to the top, right? I think about Michigan over the last couple of years and how many just returning starters they have year over year. I think about Washington this year. I think about Oregon. I think about the Texas Longhorns, just so many experienced players that have been in that system for years and years and years. And I know they rely on a couple freshmen there as well. In all those situations, rely on a few key freshmen. But we're coming to a day and age in college football where if you rely exclusively on that high school recruiting, you're going to be left behind, in my opinion, right? Like so many other programs are going to be filling those gaps with a 22-year-old grown man at linebacker instead of an 18-year-old kid. And when you try to rush that 18-year-old kid out there, sometimes you get the success stories, and that's awesome. But way more often than not, you see that kid just get passed over. And, lack of confidence starts to seep in, lack of accountability with the coaches, lack of just confidence from the coaching staff when you're seeing them not perform up to the level of that guy across on the other side of the ball. It just naturally seeps in, and it's really hurting the development. Like you said, Mitch, I think that's completely valid, where we're just kind of pouring so much. It's fascinating to see how these coaches are going to be able to split between the transfer portal and high school recruiting, because you're going to need both. You're going to have to balance both to be successful. But that high school recruiting is just going to be more and more difficult when you're always looking over your shoulder to see who could I possibly get that's better to get me to a championship level team faster.
Yeah. That brings up an interesting thought in my head. And Jake, I'd love to know if this is the case from your experience. So in the back half of my collegiate career, when that was my full-time occupation, I worked in the NIL scene, and specifically worked with one program, did a lot of their NIL facilitation. Wasn't an agent necessarily, but a big time part in helping NIL deals happen at this particular school. And so I got to know the agents, I got to know the athletes, got to know the businesses that were doing these NIL deals. And early on, there was certainly a lot of hype, a lot of excitement around the incoming freshman, around that 18-year-old who had several years presumably in front of him, where he was going to become a staple of that community, where everyone was going to get to know him. And if you invested in that kid now, it was going to pay real dividends for your business down the line. That was the assumption, at least. Now, it seems like that very quickly has turned to, Trey, like you said, 22-year-old, sixth-year linebacker who's coming to your program to win a national championship. It seems like that's where the NIL dollars are going. That's where these businesses and these boosters want to put their funds. Jake, is someone who's still very much on the ground and in the thick of things when it comes to college athletics in where you live. Is that the case that you're seeing?
I think that there's a lot of players who, especially some of the older guys, that when they go into the portal, one of the things on their mind, and rightfully so, is the possibility of earning a lucrative NIL deal, within the region that they go to school. And that's something that I think is really important, because for, some of these guys, like you mentioned earlier, I think it might have been you, Trey, they never know when they play their last down a ball. And so for those guys to come in and, try to win, regardless of if they're contributing or not, if they're being good to the community and, being a positive voice and uplifting local businesses and stuff like that, I think that that's really important. But also at the same time, I do think that there's a lot of it going on in high school recruiting as well. And a lot of, promises. I can't say anything regarding like dollar amounts or anything like that, or what is exactly being said, but I know for a fact that NIL is also definitely a factor in the high school recruiting game at this point. And it is a game, because you're playing against coaches with all sorts of different kinds of tactics, and so you got to figure out a way to better leverage your school's NIL resources and collectives against other schools, collectives, because these collectives have definitely taken off and becoming probably the primary form of NIL, where donors can directly give to that. Whereas I think when NIL started, I think a lot of people just foresaw brand deals and not a pay for play kind of model. And I'm not saying that that's where we're at right now. I wouldn't be surprised if there is pay for play going on somewhere in the country. Wouldn't shock me at all. But I do think that maybe we've shifted a little bit away from what the original purpose of NIL was, which, to be fair, I think is a great thing for everybody involved. I don't want to make it seem like I'm not a proponent of NIL. It's a net gain for everybody involved, but obviously there are some downsides to it, which that's too long of a discussion to even get into.
Right. Well, and I think that gets back to, the subscriber questions asking, is it too late? Like, did we already screw this up? And I think from all three of our sentiments, I think the general answer is, yeah, the issues that persist are probably too far gone to just fix, right? To just have a snappy solution that, hey, let's eliminate tampering. Here's how you stop tampering. Here's how you stop any sort of pay for play, Jake, like you talked about, from springing up. The NIL allowing players to benefit from their name, image, and likeness is obviously a great thing. Like before, when you had kids losing all of their eligibility because they were running a YouTube channel, that was ridiculous. That was so far the other way that when the NCAA did more or less get pressured into legalizing NIL, they just fell asleep at the wheel. They went too far the other way. They course corrected to the other extreme. And now it's in this wild west where it feels like instead of just having everyone, be able to benefit from NIL, we have third parties that are just actively applying the leverage that now creates this whole mess, this whole disparity, even from a program to program basis.
Gracious, how about